This is the Everything EV podcast by EV Powered.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Everything EV podcast, the podcast dedicated to everything electric. I'm your host, Charlie Atkinson, and in these episodes we'll be discussing everything to do with electric travel, so whether it be cars, bikes, boats or even planes, we'll have it covered. We'll also be speaking to people from within the industry to get their views on the EV space, as well as other features such as electric car reviews, electric motorsport coverage, and much more along the way. This podcast is available on all streaming platforms, so be sure to subscribe to wherever you get your podcast from to receive every single episode as soon as it's released. And please do go back and check out all our other episodes too. Ahead of the final weekend of Extreme E's inaugural season, which takes place in Dorset later this month, we speak with Catie Munnings, one half of the Andretti United Extreme E team. In her very first season, Catie, along with teammate Timmy Hansen, has navigated circuits in some of the most challenging locations in the world, whilst also shining a light on some of the most pressing climate issues facing the planet today. In this episode, Catie is here to share her thoughts on the season so far, the role of women in motorsport, and much more. So, Catie, welcome to the podcast, first of all. Now, we're almost at the end of the very first season of Extreme E, and I suppose my first question is, how have you found life in Extreme E? Is it what you thought it would be like, or has it been completely different?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, we had no idea what to expect going into this first season. We really didn't even know the car that well, to be honest with you, either. We had kind of one testing session last December in Spain, but other than that, it has literally been a case of, learn on the job kind of thing, which I think is really exciting because motorsport nowadays can get very predictable. You always have the same team winning or the same car, and I think with this, actually, we were all going into it with a fresh slate, and everyone was trying to figure out how to win and what that actually takes. So I think being spontaneous has been the number one thing of the year, that you have to be able to obviously adapt to the changing format, changing conditions, new car, new team, new location. So that's actually been really fun, and I think it's kind of been a lot more easy kind of for me as a team with Andretti, because I get on so well with Timmy and the rest of the team. So that support has already kind of been there, and me and Timmy had a really solid friendship going into this year. So I think that has really played to us, and I think that actually translates on track as well and affects the overall performance of the team. So it's been really cool that we've been able to start the year and then also continue on a high. I think with season one, with any championship, of course, you have the kind of technical issues with the car. We've seen some updates come through, obviously, as we learn that. So we've been unlucky sometimes that a mechanical has sort of, put us down in the standings or not enabled us to get to the final. But I think that there's been really positive changes to the sporting format throughout the year that's meant that even if you have one of those issues, you'll be able to have a chance to kind of a last chance qualify to the final. So I think it's positive for next year, and hopefully it will be, the teething problems will be sorted and we'll be able to go at it, and the championship will kind of be solidly done on the racing, which will be really important.
Yeah, we'll have a bit more of an in-depth look back over the season a little bit later on, but I wanted to touch on your background a little bit first, because you've had quite an interesting route into Extreme E compared to all the others on the grid. So could you just tell us about your journey and how you've got to where you are today?
Yeah, well, it's always a strange one because I never looked at motorsport as a career. So I didn't start with karting or single seater, as quite often is the case. So I grew up, my dad, he did a bit of rallying when he was younger, and then he was an instructor at Brands Hatch and London rally schools. So I would go to work with him and sit in the passenger seat and be terrified by him. But I think that's probably where the adrenaline addiction came from. And then when I was a bit older, my parents had a motorsport entertainment company, which was like quad biking and Honda pilots and all of that sort of stuff, which was run from a family farm. So I'd come home from school and we'd have that going on in the back garden, and I was really lucky from that sense that it was just fun for me, and I'd never felt like I was training for anything, but I probably picked up some decent skills along the way that kind of, it was coaching without knowing it. So that was important, first of all, that I really enjoyed it myself and I wasn't kind of feeling that I was pushed into it, because I think you can often see athletes in general, not just when we're looking at motorsport, but you can see them peak if they've been really, their careers have been mapped out since they were 10. So it was very different for me. I started grass auto testing when I was 14, and that was kind of like handbrake turns and reverse flicks, literally cost £15 at your local airfield in your motor club. So that was what I was doing every Wednesday. And then when I was 17, I went to a test in Mont Blanc, a rally test with Peugeot, and I had the opportunity to test one of their cars. Alongside, they had some of the current European champions and French champions, and I was a complete novice. I was, I just had passed my driving test really in the UK. So I was definitely learning a lot from them, and I worked a lot with their engineers and their driver coach. who didn't speak any English either. He was French, so he was sort of hitting my legs when he wanted me to brake and accelerate. So that was I remember it like it was yesterday. But yeah, I was just absolutely amazed by the speed that they could drive along the side of a mountain on a gravel track. And I was kind of for me was like, right, how do I get to do that? I want to know if I can do that too. So that's when my journey began into motorsport. And then I was in the European Championship and World Championship, and then I had the opportunity to join Extreme E, which I was really excited about. I didn't believe Extreme E as a concept would work at the beginning, because it just, we hadn't seen anything like it really, especially when you think of the off-road space. I know we have Formula E, but from off-road side, it'd really been rally as being all that I'd done. And so when the championship phoned me and said, we want to put you in the driver's pool, and there's going to be a big cargo ship that carries the cars around the world. We're going to offload in the Amazon and then on the ice sheet in Greenland, to places that have never been driven on before, that have been devastated by climate change. And then when we leave, we're going to replant all the trees. And it was like, I was just trying to get my head around it, and I just didn't understand how that would work. So anyway, after a few conversations, I was really keen, and I was thinking, wow, if this takes off, I do want to be a part of it. So I signed up, and then Andretti United got in touch pretty quickly, and yeah, the rest is history, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. And here you are today. So just on the subject of your background then, obviously you've got a history of racing all different cars and vehicles of all different shapes and sizes. But what is it like being behind the wheel of a fully electric SUV in some of the most remote locations in the world? And how challenging has it been to get to grips with the car?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, the car in itself is quite easy to drive. I know it looks the opposite from the outside, and especially when you see it next week, if you're coming to Dorset, when you see it in the flesh, it's massive, like much bigger than it looks on TV. And I think that because obviously we're racing in places like the desert and the ice sheet and beaches and stuff, you don't really put it into context of, normal surroundings, but trying to park it in a garage or anything like that, it's just absolutely huge. So, yeah, I think that's the first thing. And I remember when I first saw it, I was thinking, I'd already signed up to the championship at this point, and I remember thinking, oh my gosh, how am I going to drive that? I've got no idea. How do you even make that slide? It looks like it's just going to tip over. And Timmy had actually done some of the suspension development the year before, and he said it's easier than you think. So I really held on to those words. And I really, it drives like a race car. You're not losing out because it's electric. It really is fun to drive. And it puts up, I know I was speaking earlier about the teething problems and reliability that we've obviously worked on a lot, but it puts up, when you think we're not racing on a racetrack, we're racing in the natural environment that we've then got to judge how fast we can go so we don't break the car, kind of thing. So it's an adjustment from that side, and it's really strong from the places that we're doing and what we're putting it through. So it is a beast at the end of the day, I guess. It's cool to be learning about the electric side and the charging and battery temperature management and all of these things that I haven't been used to. I think from the driving side, the noise you don't have, obviously, of the petrol, but that's just kind of, you lose one of your senses then when you're driving, and you have to adapt to feel the car in another way. So for example, when you're locking brakes, you don't hear that kind of knocking sound that you hear with a combustion engine. So you actually have to feel it a lot more and be a lot more sensitive. And I remember mine and Timmy's first test, we came back in and the engineer was like, you're locking brakes at pretty much every corner. And we were like, are we? I don't know that. And so, yeah, it's just adapting from that sense. But after, half an hour in the car, then you just feel natural with it, and it doesn't really feel like too much of a job.
Perfect. And now I just wanted to go back to when you touched on some of the locations that you've raced in across the season. In your opinion, what have been some of the most challenging? Because obviously you got your win in Greenland earlier this year, but was that still challenging, or in your mind was that a bit easier than all the others?
I guess Saudi Arabia was new to both Timmy and I, so we were lucky. We managed to get 2 Polaris buggies to go to Dubai with for a week. We were literally just like driving in the sand dunes, trying to learn every day, just him and I. So that was really fun. And so that we'd had a little bit of training, but when you consider we're up against people that have won Dakar and, the people from America that race in the sand dunes all the time, it was a new surface for us. I think we adapted really well to that. And, obviously we had a decent result in Saudi on the podium. I think Sardinia for us was an event that was tough. I think the terrain, I guess they go together really, because obviously we're learning a lot about the car and the setup, and we weren't comfortable in Sardinia. And I think where we weren't comfortable was on the bumps, and sorry, not Sardinia, Senegal. And Senegal was bumpy everywhere. There's no other way to describe it. It was just like tiny little moguls. If you ski, I don't know if you ski, but like it was like moguls on the beach. So it was a real challenge for us, because then we were obviously impacted by every bump and having to limit our speed, because we weren't in a kind of a positive place where we felt like we could push without damaging the car. So I think that for us was tough. To be honest with you, the sporting format at that time, we wouldn't have been able to make the final anyway. We stopped on track with a kind of technical issue, I think for whatever it was, 5 minutes or something in qualifying. So at that point, we were then just in the shootout race, which decides 7th, 8th and 9th position. So there was no chance to get to the final. So we were able to kind of play around a bit and use it as a bit of a test to see where we needed to be going forwards. And that was positive. So I guess there's always good things to come out of it. And then we were able then to kind of take that findings into Greenland and change our setup, which just gave Timmy and I confidence from the get-go. And we were ultimately, fast as soon as we kind of started in qualifying. We did have another issue that stopped us on track for a few minutes, but actually Timmy, I think there was quite a few issues that weekend that we've obviously fixed since. So we were still able to make it to the final, and obviously we took a win there, which was incredible. So probably from my side, that was the most familiar surface, that kind of gravel. That's what I'm used to. I'm used to obviously tarmac and gravel, and snow and things like that, but not so much the sand side. So that for me was like, and I think for Timmy also, we felt really at home there in Greenland. And obviously we'll have fun and be biased, and we'll have fun memories looking back on that one anyway. I think going then to Sardinia, where we've just been, we had really strong pace. We were quick all weekend. Obviously, we had a kind of disqualification for a start incident in the semi-final. So then obviously we can't get into the final. But again, as it was with Senegal, you have to take the positives from that weekend, and we'll take that pace into Dorset. And I think Dorset will be a surface that I'm quite familiar on. I've grown up in the kind of countryside with muddy fields around me, as I said earlier, and we're obviously racing on the mud in the UK in Dorset, so hopefully it will be quite similar to my childhood, and I'll be able to have some skills. I'm sure it's going to be slippery. I think it's going to be very slippery, especially with our power and our car and our weight, and probably the rain. I don't know what the forecast is, but you can pretty much guarantee that on one of the 3 days we're going to be driving, it's not going to be clear blue skies this time of year in the UK.
Yeah, well, we've had about 2 storms in the past week, so I can't imagine the weather is going to be too nice. But, I mean, obviously you will be racing on home soil next week. So have you had any conversations with Timmy about what to expect from the UK and what it might be like racing over here?
To be honest, I haven't really. He's been super busy. I don't think he's been home since I last saw him in Sardinia. He's been obviously wrapping up the World Championship, and then obviously in America doing Nitro. So I think he's home this week. I'm sure we'll have, because I think he's coming over before the race, obviously. So we'll have some time to catch up on it then. But he's really chilled. He's really, it's typical Scandinavian. Turns up, doesn't stress that much in advance, sees the course, and then is fast. It's actually annoying because he doesn't really have to work that hard. He's very he's experienced, he's confident in his abilities, which I think is amazing, and definitely the way to have a long career without kind of burnout. I guess he's very good at managing it. So I mean, for the first race in Saudi, we did as much prep as we could, but we have to remember here, we don't see the track, so it's not like we get on boards to study or anything like that. It really is just a case of seeing a few photos of that kind of surface in the area and thinking, oh yeah, that's probably quite slippery, or then it looks a bit grippy, or whatever it might be. So other than that, it really is down to the track walk. That's kind of where the important stuff is done.
Just off the back of that, and when you say you're learning on the job day by day, when you look back over the season as a whole, obviously you said there's been highs and lows. So do you look back on the season with regret and as missed opportunities, or has this season been more about learning the car, the types of racing, and almost preparing for next season in a way?
Definitely. And I think my team coming from Formula E obviously probably had the same experience in the early seasons of Formula E. As a new championship builds and grows, there's always things that are changed, and whether that be the car or the format or within the team, everyone's expanding and everyone's growing. So I don't think it's been like the pressure, oh, you have to win every race now, or that will be it. I think the fact that me and Timmy are with the team next year is we can kind of have confidence in that, and then we can enjoy it a bit more, because obviously we're gaining the knowledge together that then we're going to be able to take together into next year. We've seen some cars have a lot more luck, to be honest, and reliability hasn't really affected them. So obviously they've been able to do well in the overall standings, and some teams haven't. We all feel really sorry for the Ganassi team, who have been quick and just haven't had a break. So hopefully it will be it will be a bit more even next year from that side, and then we can look forwards from that sense. So it's always, I think, probably the frustrating thing, to answer your question, is always when it's out of your control, and I think that's probably been the thing that has been slightly out of our control, and some other teams this year as well. So hopefully next year the talking will all be on the track, and it has been the majority of it, so we've been lucky, but it's kind of having a bit of patience with that, and just taking it as it is, but making sure that we gain something from the races where even statistically we may not be able to do that well, for whatever reason. It's important to always be learning when we have such limited time running the cars.
Yeah, one thing I did want to touch on is, just from listening to you talk and going off of some of your answers, it feels like there is quite a strong community spirit within Extreme E, and I know there's always going to be competition and that willingness to win, like with any sport, but is it fair to say that there's quite a good atmosphere between all the teams, and do you get on with the other teams and drivers, for example?
Yeah, there is, to be honest. And I think, it would be impossible not to be friends with people in this championship, because you have to remember we're traveling to places where, I think in Greenland, the population of the town was 400. And then we're traveling in, as a race. And you just wouldn't have anyone to talk to if you didn't socialize. So obviously we're all staying on the boat where we can. So that means we'll all kind of join tables at dinner. Each team only has 7 people, but it's only ever the kind of drivers and sometimes the team managers that stay on the boat. So it really is a tight-knit community from that side. There's what is that? I don't know. There's 18, is it, drivers or something? So it really isn't that many. And yeah, I mean, it's been nice because I think there's been a lot of friendships that have come from different sports. Obviously, rallycross is quite big. There's quite a few rallycross drivers. Obviously, then you have the rally with Carlos and Seb Loeb, and I've been sat next to Carlos Sainz on the way back from the track in Greenland, and sort of asking him how his son's day was going, because his son was obviously racing as well at the same time, and he was telling me about the Formula One and what he's been hearing. And even doing the track walk with Seb Loeb in Sardinia, I found out that he used to drive tanks in the army. So there was loads of funny things that come from it, and I think there's a lot of obviously when the week gets started and we're competitive, we're all focusing on our own team areas. But before that, because we have these science legacy programs and we have these day trips, and we're staying in the same places, or even where we didn't stay on the boat, we're really in the middle of nowhere. So there's always a sense of community, and I like that. And I think everybody's been saying that's very season 1 vibes for the new championship. Apparently it was the same with Formula E. I think when it gets bigger and in the next few years you kind of see teams spreading out a bit, but I think for now it's a really nice environment.
Yeah, and obviously a big part of that, and another reason why Extreme E is so groundbreaking, is that its driver lineup is split between men and women. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on how important it is that women like yourself have been put front and centre of one of the fastest growing motorsports in the world, because that's never really been seen before, has it?
It hasn't, and I think it's really positive. I'm always for comparing yourself to the fastest driver, whether that be a boy or a girl. That's the way that I grew up in rally. I never was interested in the ladies' trophies or whatever, because there was a faster driver. There was no reason why you couldn't aim towards that, if you know what I mean. So I was always a bit funny about segregation championships just for women, and I would much rather put that funding into actually the females that are there or have a chance to be there, but perhaps don't have the budget that their male counterparts have got, or the testing or whatever the support may be that they need. I would love to be able to see girls at the top against the guys, I think, across the board in motorsport. So I think for me that was the sort of most important thing when I was growing up in my career. I was and obviously Extreme E has created seats for girls, which is fantastic, because I think it shows as from a role model side of view, the fact that we're on BBC and ITV and Sky Sports quite frequently. It's mainstream, and I think that's the most important. They can be sat at home on a Sunday afternoon, turn the TV on, and then see, oh, hang on, there's a female driver there against the guys. Because I've been to schools and stuff before with the Women in Motorsport Commission. It used to be called Dare to Be Different, now it's Girls on Track, which was founded by Susie Wolf. And we would kind of say to the girls, who wants to be a Formula One driver? And the amount of girls that would say, I didn't know you could be, because I thought that was just a man's sport, because you don't see any females, and they don't understand why they don't see any females on the grid. So that, to me, really kind of highlighted how much talent we're losing out on, because people just don't think it's accessible to them. So I think just putting it in the public eye, but also making sure that you have females that are serious about it and are there for the right reasons. That was really important for me. We've seen girls enter, teams enter girls in the past for PR and media, and And they often don't get the same opportunity as the guys. They'll be doing the media interviews at the front, while the guys will be developing the cars out the back. And that kind of stuff really does have an impact. Experience is kilometers in this game, and it's expensive to test, and we can't just pick up a tennis racket in practice. So for me, that equality is really important. And with Extreme E, it's in everyone's interest for the girls to be as fast as the guys and to get as fast as they can, because ultimately, the team result will not be there if they're not performing. So I think that's cool. And I think it's also, having spoken to the other girls, it's opened up a lot of other doors and other forms of motorsport for them, just from a visibility point of view of, the competition's been a lot closer than we thought it would be. It's not a segregation between the guys and the girls on times, it's kind of interlinked and mixing. So I think that's really exciting. And it's just cool to showcase that talent, and hopefully we'll have a really strong field that's going to follow us as well, that we've kind of inspired, that are in the probably low levels of motorsport now, that are working towards it and gaining experience. It gives them something to aim for.
Amazing. And one thing we haven't touched on is probably the main objectives of Extreme E, and that's the climate and sustainability goals of the series. How important were those climate commitments to you when you were approached to join the series, or were they just a bonus on top of being able to race in a cool car in cool locations?
Well, really, it's like the icing on top of the cake, as you say. I've never turned down racing in cool locations, especially, me and Timmy were two of the first drivers to sign, and we had no idea of the drivers that would follow, or even the teams. A lot of the teams hadn't signed, so we had no idea that, we'd have Formula One teams entering, Formula One drivers enter their teams. That Jensen would be driving, or Seb Loeb, or Carlos Sainz. These are all people. I'm a lot younger than the rest of the field, really, so it's a lot of people that I, grew up watching on TV and standing at the side of the road watching in rally cars. So it was really, the first race for me was quite, I was like rabbit in a headlights, standing next to these people, having our driver photos. And Timmy was a great coach for that, because he was saying, have respect off the track, but on the track, you have to remember that you're here because you're good behind the wheel as well, and they've got a wheel and they've got pedals and they haven't driven the car either. And so it was true. And I think your confidence builds throughout the year. But I think for me, definitely the environmental side was a massive part of it, because this was in the middle of the pandemic, when we were all in lockdown. That's when these calls were happening. And that was also the time when on the news they were saying, the pollution's dropped by this much in the city, or you can see the Himalayas for the first time from this town because people aren't commuting. And that made me realize how our everyday habits really do affect the environment, and the messaging that was around that. And I think we all kind of took a look at our lives and kind of rethought the direction that we want to be traveling in, just because we have more time to, when every day is so busy, isn't it, for everyone, that actually having that time to reflect is really rare. So it seemed like a really good move for me, and I was worried it would be not as involved as we actually are. I'm really happy to say that when we go to the races, I'll have dinner with Carlos Duarte, who's our professor, and he is the #1 ranked marine biologist in the world. So he's actually choosing these race locations based on the legacy programs that he wants to have, that he thinks will have the biggest effect on reversing climate change or helping our environment. So just speaking to him about some of the research that he does, and even when we were in Senegal planting trees, I spoke to one of the local guys who was planting the trees, and he'd been employed to plant the trees. We're planting 1 million mangroves there for carbon capture, but also for biodiversity of fish, which is their main income as a town. And he was saying, without this job from Extreme E, it would have been really difficult for him to send his children to school during the pandemic, because as you can imagine, unemployment everywhere. And he said, especially there, it wasn't it was quite a poor town in Africa. And he said it's had a social impact, and it's not just the environmental side. So when you're actually on the ground and you speak to these people, it's really, you feel really passionate about it. And it's definitely led me to do a lot more research. And I went to COP26 and I was hosting some panels on electric vehicles there. And I think I'm learning a lot as we go, but definitely I feel almost embarrassed about how ignorant I was about our environment this time last year, compared to how much I rant to my family and friends about it now.
Okay, great. And now, just to finish, the final weekend of the season takes place next week in Dorset. And so for anyone that hasn't experienced an Extreme E race before, what can they expect, and why should they tune in to watch next weekend?
I guess, I hate to say it, and hopefully it won't be the case, but there's always big action and big drama. So whether that be crashes or battles on track or fights, everyone's been watching the Formula One race with Max and Lewis. And I think, our championship will be pretty similar. We definitely have a lot of teams that are wanting to gain valuable championship points going into the last round. We're right up there. I think statistically we're third place at the minute, but second isn't out of reach. And someone told me that first is, and I haven't really looked into that myself, but I don't know what would have to happen happen for us to win. But anyway, it's a home race for us as a team. Andretti United is based in the UK. So that's and a home race for me. So that's going to be cool. It's the first time I've actually raced in England. So I'm really keen to do well. And yeah, I would just say it is a lot bigger and better than you ever expect before you watch the race. And I think, for you as well, coming in person, it will be a whole nother level compared to watching it on the TV. So yeah, I'm really excited for you to be joining us, and hopefully it will be entertaining watching as well on the TV.
That's all for this episode. Many thanks for listening, and if you liked it, then please do check out all our other episodes and be sure to subscribe to wherever you get your podcast from to make sure you get every single episode as soon as it's released. For daily news coverage, features and much more, you can also head over to evpowered.co.uk. Thanks once again for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode of the Everything EV podcast.